spending some time with James last week, and we talked about his book and servant leadership, and I said, you know, I think you're going to have a very attentive audience for a couple of reasons, not the least of which our business is one that is largely built on a servant leadership model. And what I mean by that is when we look at the Medtronic mission and what the mission calls us to do, it's all about serving our patients and our customers. And that requires us to begin to realize it isn't all about you. What I liked about what James is written and what he's going to talk about, he's going to talk about practical ways to examine your own leadership and think about your leadership in the context of servant leadership. So without any further ado, I'll ask James to come up and look forward to hearing from him.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. That was wonderful. Wow. There's a class act to follow. Thank you so much, Steve, for those wonderful comments and for setting a delightful tone here upon which I hope to build a practical foundation. And I think I speak for many in appreciation of your long-standing example of servant leadership. So I would like us to applaud. In 1989, Earl Bakken retired as an officer of Medtronic, company he co-founded. And in commemoration of that anniversary, he compiled a list of his essays, Reflections on Leadership. I am thinking that everyone gets this during your new hire and onboarding. Is that correct? Everybody has a copy of these? Okay. Truth time. How many of you have read it? Well, that's good. I strongly, strongly encourage it from cover to cover. It is just a delightful way of getting into this man's mind and heart and soul. Well, as I was reading it, I was really struck by his concluding comments in an essay called Leadership versus Management. It was on page 12. And his concluding remarks end with a question and a pretty effective statement. And he asks, we need to always be asking ourselves, how can we be effective as leaders? We meaning Medtronic. And then he concludes by saying, our future may well depend upon our response. Our future may well depend upon our response. Now, there are many, many effective leaders at Medtronic, and I can say that with great confidence. Because in my role, the past 2 years, my role as a PDI, Personnel Decisions International's global client manager for our work with Medtronic, I have connected with many caring, effective, servant-led individuals. I have conducted a number of assessments. I've coached my share of directors and managers and a few VPs. I would say extremely effective. But even so, each and every one still had room to grow. Have you ever met a leader who didn't? Anyone who was top of his game, couldn't take any more strokes away? So 20 years later from this essay, Mr. Bakken's $64,000 question, how can we be more effective as leaders? Maybe today, a $64 billion question. The question still remains, Medtronic, how can you be more effective as a leader? And these days, your future may well indeed depend upon it. I mean, Earl Bakken was an incredible visionary, but could he have predicted this economy? Could he have predicted the market pressures, your growing competition, all the political and legal challenges? I wonder. I wonder. So, ladies and gentlemen, my primary objective today, during our brief time together, is to suggest to you that servant leadership is the answer. How can we be more effective as leaders at Medtronic? Servant leadership. I hope to make a case that you will consider that answer in a very personal and practical fashion. After all, I'm only here to remind you that Medtronic's history, its values, its culture, its core behaviors are all steeped in the principles and practices of leading by serving others. The term servant leadership has been around for several millennia in the religious traditions of many different religions around the world. It was not until 1970 that AT&T executive Robert Greenleaf evolved these ideas and coined the term servant leadership, both as a personal journey and as a management strategy. There's Bob in his office and conference room at AT&T. There's Bob in his later life after his retirement in 1970. I have some of those personal pictures because my co-author of the 7 Pillars of Servant Leadership, Don Frick, is Robert Greenleaf's biographer. And he published a book by with Barrett Kohler entitled Robert K. Greenleaf, A Life of Servant Leadership. And he was privy to some wonderful pictures, some private, intimate letters between Bob and his wife, Esther. Bob was a contemporary of a lot of great thinkers, Eleanor Roosevelt, Dr. Bill of Alcoholics Anonymous fame. He did LSD with Timothy Leary. They were a little concerned about that making the book, but nevertheless, a biography is a biography. So Greenleaf wrote this monograph. I got to use this cool pen there, right there. Greenleaf wrote this little 35-page monograph called The Servant as Leader. It was available for $6 back then. I think it's available for $7 now at the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, greenleaf.org. And he sent out about 200 copies of this monograph to his friends and colleagues for their review and comment. And now, 40 years later, the comments continue to pour in. That some say his essay launched a quiet revolution in the way that we view and practice leadership. In fact, that quiet revolution is now becoming noisy. Right here you'll see that those little red dots represent Greenleaf Centers for Servant Leadership in 11 places across the globe, across the planet. And Greenleaf's monograph, The Servant as Leader, has been translated into 12 languages, most recently Arabic and Mandarin Chinese. So people who are new to servant leadership, I forgot to mention this. In February of 2004, Stone Phillips had Larry Spears, the current CEO of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, on an edition of Dateline that went out to 12 million viewers. So we're hoping that this notion does become more and more noisy. So people who are new to servant leadership may wonder what all the fuss is about. You know, what is it about this servant leadership that distinguishes it from all other leadership philosophies? Why has it inspired so many people? What is it about it that some people call transformational or transformative? Well, simply put, what distinguishes it from all other leadership philosophies is that the leader serves others. That's what matters most to the leader. The leader is a servant to others. This isn't a leader who serves, it's a servant who leads. So Robert Greenleaf tells us the servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve or desires to serve, and to serve first. Then conscious choice inspires the person to lead, to be a leader. So very simply stated, called to serve, inspired to lead. That's what Greenleaf believes about the distinction between leading and serving and servant leadership and all other leadership philosophies. So here's my objective for our brief time together. I'm here to make a case. I'm here to make a case for servant leadership, and that servant leadership is your answer. And I believe 4 things about this case. I'm gonna show you, number 1, that servant leadership, leading by serving, is a highly principled and ethical-based leadership approach. It's based on natural, universal, and time-tested traditions. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 11 centers around the world. The booklet wouldn't be translated into 12 different languages. There's something about leading by serving that calls upon what Greenleaf called mystery, the mystery within us and in our soul. Number 2, it's practical. It embodies leadership principles and practices that can be taught, measured, and mastered, especially now with the arrival of the 7 Pillars competency model, I humbly add. Number 3, it's proven. There are mountains of research into what constitutes an exemplary leader and what constitutes exemplary, effective servant leadership. And finally, and this is the one that always gets them, because servant leadership sounds kind of soft and kind of right and moral and special, and we talk about love a lot of times. But it's profitable. Servant-led organizations show superior financial returns, and they are often brand leaders in their industry. And they're often on Fortune 100 magazine's best places to work. So, principle-centered, practical, proven, and profitable. But first, let's kind of define our terms and get a little understanding of leadership. Ask a question. Is a leader born? Are they genetically predisposed to leadership, or are they made? Are they fashioned by a set of life experiences? So, great leaders, nature and nurture. What would you say? Anybody? Both. Oh, well, that kind of shuts down the debate, I guess. All right. Well, Warren Bennis, leadership expert, maven at the University of Southern California. His germinal work on leadership is foundational in our field. I love what he says about this topic. The most dangerous leadership myth is that leaders are born, that there is a genetic factor to leadership. This myth asserts that people simply either have certain charismatic leadership qualities or they don't. That's nonsense. In fact, the opposite is true. Leaders are made rather than born. Leaders are made rather than born. Each of us has a capacity for leadership. So if we boil leadership down, leadership certainly is a position. But if we boil leadership down, what really do leaders do? They get results through people. It's just as simple as that. And as Steve says, when we become a manager or we're responsible for people, now we have to get results through these folks, and my performance, my appraisal, my raise or bonus is very likely dependent on how well they perform. So why wouldn't I want to serve their interests? Why wouldn't I want to figure out how I can be the best manager they've ever had? Why wouldn't I want to ask each and every one of them, what are your goals? What are your dreams? What do you need me to do to provide resources and support to help you be more effective and more satisfied in what you're doing? And that team then will grow. So each one of us has the capacity for leadership, and this may sound a little hokey, but I'm going to do a little call and response here, because I have like 2 or 3 key messages that I want you to take away from. Not 7 messages, 7 pillars, but 2 or 3 key messages. The first one is that each and every one of you in this room contains the capacity for leadership. Some of you have been anointed or appointed as leaders. You're managers, directors, senior directors, VPs. But all of you, individual contributors or not, all of us have the capacity for leadership. So on the count of 3, I want you to repeat after me. I blank, fill in your name. I, James, contain the capacity for leadership. Okay? 1, 2, 3. I, James, contain the capacity for leadership. I'm James. I want you to put your name in there. Hello? Try it again. 1, 2, 3. I, James, contain the capacity for leadership. Final point to make. I talked about principled. Better hurry up. I talked about practical. I talked about proven. Now I'm going to talk about profitable. These are some companies, you recognize a name on there, that are often, I haven't checked lately, but at least when we were doing this research around starting to write the book and finishing the book, 205, 203 to 5. These were the companies that were most often referenced in the literature as servant-led companies. They had references to servant leadership in their founding documents. They had websites that had links. They had consulted the Greenleaf Center for resources, etc. What do they have in common? Anything? Can anybody think of what they have in common? They're all over the map. They're all publicly traded, except TD Industries. They're strong brands, they're profitable, and they are often on the best companies to work for list. So we're sitting around the office, my former firm, and we're thinking, you know, people resonate to this stuff, but there's not a lot of research that suggests that these companies are profitable. Let's do what Collins did. Let's do a little research study. Let's use Collins's method. He identified 11 publicly traded companies that were great, compared them to 11 publicly traded companies in the same industry that were good. We went through a little process, a little modified Delphi process. Any of you know about that? Subject matter experts and review of the literature does suggest that here's a pool of companies that we are fairly confident are considered servant-led or have servant leadership principles embedded in their culture. We winnowed it down to 11 publicly traded companies, and tried to match industry, not so well, but anyway, so those of you that read Collins, you remember that he compared his 11 great companies. Better than great? I will admit I put Medtronic on the top for this talk. So they aren't ranked ordered, but what the hey. You see them all there, right? Okay. Men's Warehouse, I guarantee it, George Zimmer. Go to their website. You'll see servant leadership all over it. Service Masters, Service to the Master. Toro, Ken Melrose, wrote the foreword to our book. One heck of a guy. He's got a company now in his retirement called Leading by Serving, LLC. Strong servant-led companies. Okay, so where's the profit stuff, Sipe? Well, here it is. We did our best we looked at, and I had financial help, people that know this stuff that we contracted with to help us. So we looked at the percentage of pre-tax portfolio return, what they call trailing returns over a 10-year period, ending in March 31, 05, my daughter Rachel's birthday. And here's the stock performance in those 10 years. We all know that the S&P 500 are the top 500 companies, publicly traded companies in America. And good to great companies, you saw the list earlier. They were, so S&P was up 10.8. Good to great was up 17.5. However, those servant-led companies on the list buried the great companies. So another claim in our book that's kind of outrageous, you know, serving is sexy. Servant-led companies are better than great. Not good, not great, they're better than great. And here's why. The other thing that was kind of serendipitous, we looked at the Fortune magazine's top places to work in 05, because it had just come out, I think it comes out in January. And 6 of our servant-led companies were on the list that year. None of Collins's were. And we know that this creates this servant lead. The best companies to work for is now a big deal, and companies spend thousands, millions. It's a great branding and positioning statement, and I mean, they keep and grow top talent because they're great places to work. So, let's just sum it up. Beatles, all you need is love. I guess that would be another way of answering the question, corny as it sounds. Medtronic, my friends, How can you be even more effective as leaders? Well, all you need is love and 7 pillars of servant leadership. Good luck. Thank you.